Have you ever been told to just be yourself? Sounds easy, right? Comforting even. Like a warm cliche that promises clarity. But what if that advice is the biggest trap of all? See, the problem is no one tells you which self they're talking about. The one that's ambitious, loud, driven, or the one that's tired, quiet, numb. The one who dreams big, or the one who's scared to even try. Identity isn't a fixed point. It's shifting, fluid, conflicted. So when someone says, be yourself, who are you actually supposed to be? You try to act natural, but end up performing. The problem begins with a simple question. What exactly is this self we're supposed to be true to? Is it fixed or fluid? Singular or multiple? Nature or nurture? Or something else entirely? The ancient Greeks had a saying inscribed at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Know thyself. Notice they didn't say be thyself. They recognized that understanding who you are comes first, and it's no simple task. Socrates dedicated his life to this pursuit. He claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. He understood that yourself requires constant questioning, not blind acceptance. But let's go deeper, shall we? When someone tells you to just be yourself, which self are they referring to exactly? The Buddhist tradition suggests something radical. There is no permanent, unchanging self at all. The concept of anatta, or no self, proposes a different view. What we call our self is actually a collection. Ever-changing processes, perceptions, experiences. The 5th century Buddhist monk Nagasena compared it to a chariot. Remove the wheels, the axle, the carriage. What remains? No chariot, just a conventional designation for a collection of parts. Perhaps your self is similarly just a convenient fiction. Intriguing, isn't it? That the very thing you're being told to be might not even exist. At least not in any fixed, permanent way. David Hume, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, came to a surprisingly similar conclusion. He wrote that when he looked inward to find his self, he only ever found particular perceptions, feelings, sensations, thoughts, but never any separate entity called a self. For Hume, the self was just a bundle or collection of different perceptions in perpetual flux and movement. So if the self is constantly changing, which version should you be true to? The one from 5 years ago? The one you'll become tomorrow? The one that exists only on Sunday mornings when you're well rested and at peace? This isn't merely philosophical wordplay. It has profound implications for how you live your life. Consider how often your desires conflict with one another. Part of you wants to stay up watching another episode. Another part knows you'll regret it tomorrow. One aspect of your personality craves deep connection. Another fears vulnerability. Are you being yourself when you indulge the impulse? Or when you resist it? Friedrich Nietzsche understood this dilemma well. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. Your authentic self exists in tension with social expectations." But Nietzsche didn't advocate for simple rebellion. He suggested something far more nuanced: self-creation. Become who you are, he wrote. This implies that authenticity isn't about discovering a pre-existing self, but actively creating one. Want to understand more about creating your authentic self? Hit subscribe now. The existentialists took this idea even further. Jean-Paul Sartre famously declared that existence precedes essence. You exist first. And then through your choices and actions, you create your essence. There is no predetermined self to be true to. You are constructing yourself with every decision you make. This is both terrifying and liberating, isn't it? The weight of responsibility is immense, but so is the freedom. So what happens when we blindly follow the advice to just be yourself? Often, we end up reinforcing our existing habits, our biases, our limitations. We mistake our current state for our essential nature. We confuse "this is how I am now" with "this is who I am, fundamentally and permanently." Let me offer an example that might resonate. Imagine someone who describes themselves as just not a math person. By embracing this as their authentic self, they close off possibilities for growth. They mistake a temporary state for a fixed identity. The advice to just be yourself ironically becomes a cage rather than a path to freedom. But what alternatives do we have? If being yourself is problematic, what should we do instead? Carl Jung offers a compelling direction. He proposed that true individuation requires integrating the shadow aspects of your personality, the parts you typically reject or deny. Authenticity for Jung wasn't about embracing only your comfortable, familiar qualities, but about acknowledging the full spectrum of your humanity, including the parts you'd rather not face. This is where it gets interesting. What if authenticity isn't about consistency with your past self, but about integrity with your values and aspirations? What if it's not about expressing whatever impulse arises in the moment, but about aligning your actions with your deepest principles? Charles Taylor suggests precisely this. He distinguishes between different forms of authenticity. Authenticity as mere self-fulfillment versus authenticity as moral alignment with horizons of significance. Things that matter beyond our subjective preferences. True authenticity, in his view, connects us to something larger than ourselves. Consider how differently we might live if we replaced "just be yourself" with different advice. Become your best self. Create yourself intentionally. Transcend yourself. The Stoic philosophers would certainly agree with this shift. Epictetus taught that we should focus not on expressing our every thought and feeling, but on developing virtuous character. For Stoics, authenticity meant living in accordance with nature. Not your individual nature, but with rational nature as a whole. This required self-mastery rather than self-indulgence. Now, I can hear the objections forming. But isn't there value in accepting yourself as you are? In not constantly striving to be different? Absolutely. Self-acceptance is vital. But it's not the same as assuming your current self is fixed and final. Paradoxically, true growth often begins with accepting where you are, while simultaneously recognizing that you're capable of change. The psychologist Carl Rogers observed this apparent contradiction. He found that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Acceptance provides the security from which exploration becomes possible. So perhaps there's wisdom in a modified version of this advice. Not just be yourself, which can imply stasis, but accept yourself as you are, then grow intentionally. This subtle shift acknowledges both your current reality and your potential. Think about the most admirable people you know. Are they admirable because they express whatever impulses arise within them? Or because they've shaped themselves according to values and ideals they've thoughtfully chosen? The philosopher Aristotle would suggest the latter. His concept of eudaimonia, human flourishing, comes through developing virtuous habits over time. You become brave by practicing courage, kind by practicing compassion, wise by practicing reflection. The authentic self in this view is not something you discover, but something you cultivate through deliberate practice. This reveals another problem with just be yourself. It suggests authenticity is easy. Just remove the masks, stop pretending, and voila, your true self emerges. But what if becoming your authentic self is actually the hardest work you'll ever do? Martin Heidegger described how we typically live in a state of fallenness, absorbed in social conventions, distracted by trivialities, disconnected from our deepest possibilities. For Heidegger, authenticity required a radical confrontation with our own mortality and finitude. Only by facing the limited nature of our existence could we take full responsibility for our choices. Live with genuine resolve. Not exactly the light, effortless process implied by just be yourself, is it? This brings us to a crucial question. If the self is not fixed, but fluid, how do we avoid falling into complete relativism? If we're constantly creating ourselves, what provides direction and coherence to this process? Emmanuel Levinas offers a profound answer: our responsibility to others. For Levinas, the self is fundamentally constituted through ethical relationship with the other. Authenticity isn't found in isolated self-examination, but in recognizing our infinite responsibility toward other people. We become ourselves through how we respond to others' needs and vulnerability. There's something deeply compelling about this perspective. What if your true self emerges not when you focus on self-expression, but when you respond to others with compassion and care? What if authenticity is found not in asking, "Who am I?" but "How should I treat those around me?" This connects to another limitation of just be yourself. It can foster excessive self-focus in a world already suffering from narcissism and disconnection. The advice centers your own comfort and expression above all else, potentially at the expense of community and relationship. The communitarian philosophers remind us that we are fundamentally social beings, embedded in communities and traditions. Your identity doesn't emerge in isolation, but through participation in shared practices and narratives. The question becomes not just, who am I? But what communities do I belong to? And what do I contribute to them? So where does this leave us? Is just be yourself completely worthless as advice? Not entirely. At its best, this guidance pushes back against harmful conformity, against external pressures that truly don't serve you. When it means don't pretend to be someone you're not to gain approval, there's wisdom there. When it means don't violate your core values to fit in, it's sound counsel. But we need to recognize its limitations, reframe it more thoughtfully. Perhaps instead of just be yourself, we might say something different. Discover yourself continuously. Create yourself intentionally. Transcend yourself regularly. Let's break this down. Discover yourself continuously acknowledges that self-knowledge is an ongoing process, not a one-time achievement. The self is not static, but evolving, with depths that require persistent exploration. Create yourself intentionally recognizes that we actively shape who we become. Through our choices, our habits, our commitments, we are not merely passive recipients of a predetermined identity. Transcend yourself regularly reminds us that our highest moments often come when we move beyond self-focus, towards something larger, whether that's service to others, connection to nature, or pursuit of truth and beauty. This revised approach maintains what's valuable in the original advice, while addressing its philosophical shortcomings. But let's get practical for a moment. How might this reframed understanding of authenticity actually change how you live? Consider social anxiety, a common struggle. The "just be yourself" advice often falls flat here. It doesn't acknowledge the complexity of the situation. Which self should you be when part of you wants to connect and another part is terrified? A more nuanced approach might involve accepting the anxiety as part of your current experience, while gently challenging yourself to act according to your deeper values, despite the discomfort. Or consider career decisions. Follow your passion, a close cousin of "just be yourself," can be equally misleading. It suggests there's a single fixed passion waiting to be discovered. What if instead you focused on developing valuable skills, contributing meaningfully to others, gradually building a career that aligns with your evolving interests and values? The philosopher Alain de Botton suggests that our modern crisis of authenticity stems partly from unrealistic expectations about how special and unique we should feel. Perhaps true authenticity isn't about being spectacularly different from everyone else, but about engaging honestly and meaningfully with the common human condition. There's something profoundly comforting in this perspective. You don't need to be extraordinarily unique to be authentic. You just need to be present and honest in your ordinary human experience. The Indian philosophical tradition offers another angle worth considering. In Advaita Vedanta, the quest isn't to discover or create a better individual self, but to recognize that your deepest identity transcends individuality altogether. The true self, with a capital S, is universal consciousness, which you access not through self-improvement, but through self-transcendence. What we typically call our self, our personality, preferences, and history, is seen as a useful but limited vehicle, not our fundamental identity, from static being to dynamic becoming, from expression to creation, from isolation to connection. And with this understanding comes not just the freedom to be who you are, but the responsibility to become who you might be at your best. Because the truth behind the lie of "just be yourself" is this: you are not a finished product, but a work in progress. Your authenticity lies not in expressing a fixed identity, but in consciously shaping who you become. And this process never ends. It deepens, complexifies, and enriches throughout your lifetime. Perhaps that's the most authentic truth of all. Want to understand more about creating your authentic self? Hit subscribe now